The wind here doesn't howl, it whispers, it snakes through broken window frames and hollow doorways, carrying stories no one told and footsteps no one left. The town is still, but not empty. Every vine that curls around a rusted swing set feels like a finger pointing backward in time. This is Sagebrush Hollow. Once it was a town like any other. You could find it on paper maps tucked into the glove boxes of travelers in the 1950s somewhere, between the wheat fields and the hills marked by a tiny red dot that no longer exists. No one lives here now, no one has for 73 years, and yet the ground feels recently used, as if a breath was just held and released. An entire town gone overnight. No wreckage, no evidence, no declared disaster, just a void. Houses left with plates on the table, beds made tight, curtains drawn, radios buzzing with static. No blood, no bodies, no signs of struggle, just a vanishing. The United States government never issued a statement. No newsreels reported the disappearance, and over time, it became a whisper told by drifters and late-night radio callers. A place that once was, but now wasn't, the kind of story told only when the fire burns low. You see, the terrifying thing isn't that the people disappeared, it's that they were forgotten until now. This morning, under gray skies, an old man stepped forward. He gave a name that wasn't on any registry, presented a photo that hadn't aged, pointed to a piece of land long erased from satellite imagery, and said 5 words that cracked the silence open like a fault line. I was the only one. The press didn't believe him, most still don't. But in a locked studio basement we sat with him. He was shaking, not from age, but from memory, eyes like mirrors reflecting something none of us could see. And before he spoke a single word, he asked us, do you believe that a place can eat time? We didn't answer, because sometimes it's not about belief, it's about listening. And so we did. What follows is not a horror story, it's a memory unraveling a town remembered by the last soul it left behind, a boy swallowed by silence, now returning as an old man haunted by echoes. As he tells his tale, the facts bend, but the feeling never lies. The feeling is what makes you check the mirror twice. The feeling is what makes you ask, what if it happened again? If you had driven through Sagebrush Hollow in the summer of 1952, you wouldn't have found anything strange. In fact, you might have thought it was paradise, the kind of town where time moved slow and polite, where people waved at strangers and children rode bicycles down unpaved streets without helmets or fear, where porch swings creaked like lullabies in the wind and lemonade tasted like it had secrets. There was one church, one schoolhouse, one general store where everything cost too little and everyone knew your name. The bakery opened at dawn, its windows fogged with the breath of hot bread and quiet gossip. The sheriff didn't carry a gun, just a leather belt, a thick mustache, and a quiet sense of fairness. People called it the Hollow, but not because it felt empty, quite the opposite. It was full of laughter, of rhythm, of routine. It was the kind of place where nothing ever changed, and that's what made it so strange. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can smell the cedarwood and burning maple leaves. I can hear the Sunday bells. I can see Mrs. Weller brushing flour off her apron while humming something old and sad. I can feel the way the town held itself together, like it was pretending to be normal. I was 9 years old then. My name back then was Henry Bell. We lived on Willow Street, blue house, shuttered windows. A rusting tricycle leaned against the fence long after I outgrew it. My father was a carpenter, quiet man, built everything with his hands, including the silence between us. My mother, she was soft-spoken, riddles always made me close the curtains before sunset. I didn't question things then, children don't, but there were moments, small delicate cracks in the porcelain, like how the postman, Mr. Jonas, wore the same shirt every day, or how the mail stopped coming entirely, but nobody said anything, or how the dog across the street barked only at mirrors. There was no television in Sagebrush Hollow, just radios, and even they sometimes whispered things that weren't part of the broadcast still life. When on picnics, county fairs, school plays, the church choir sang louder every week as if trying to drown out something else. And I remember thinking how strange that everyone seems to smile at the same time and stop smiling just as fast. Looking back now, it wasn't that the town was peaceful, it was contained like a snow globe, beautiful, perfect, but sealed, and sometimes if you shook it too hard you could swear the figures inside moved on their own. There was one moment I returned to often, a Tuesday. Cloudless sky, the kind of day that only exists in memory. I was sitting under the old oak tree behind the schoolhouse, chewing on a pencil, pretending to do arithmetic. A girl named Anna sat beside me, freckles, messy braid, fearless laugh. She turned to me suddenly and said, "Do you ever feel like we're being watched?" I didn't understand what she meant. I do now. There was a tightness in the town, like a breath held too long, like everyone was waiting for something they couldn't name. The adults whispered when they thought we couldn't hear at night. I saw shadows move against windows, shapes that didn't belong to anyone inside. The church was always locked after 6 p.m., but lights flickered in the steeple well past midnight. One night my mother tucked me in and lingered by the door. She didn't say good night. She just looked at me and whispered, "If something ever feels wrong, don't look in the mirror. Just close your eyes, Henry. Promise me." And I did, because that's what you do when your mother speaks with fear braided into her voice. You promise, even if you don't know why. Sagebrush Hollow wasn't a town that changed. It was a town that remembered. And sometimes I think that's worse, because things that remember can wait. They can watch, and they can decide quietly, without warning, that they no longer want to be remembered. They say hindsight is 20/20, but that's not true. Hindsight is a ghost. It follows you, tugs at your sleeve, whispers what you missed, but only after it's too late to change it. I've replayed that last day 1,000 times. The day before Sagebrush Hollow vanished, and every time I revisit it, something new feels off. A detail I didn't catch as a child, a moment I ignored, a strange rhythm, a silence between words. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, it was precise, as if the town had been marked for expiration. That morning the sky looked wrong, not cloudy, not stormy, just bruised, like the color had been drained ever so slightly. The sun rose late, and shadows stretched longer than they should. Our neighbor's rooster didn't crow. The air smelled faintly of metal and lilac. I remember my mother burning breakfast. She never did. That she stood at the stove, unmoving, staring out the kitchen window, like she was waiting for something to arrive. Her fingers were trembling. "Go to school," she said without looking at me, "but be back before the sun touches the hill." It was August. The sun didn't usually set until well after dinner, but I nodded. Children do what they're told. When adults sound afraid at school, everything felt delayed. Lessons were shorter. Mrs. Holbrook repeated herself often, as if she couldn't remember what came next. One boy threw up during recess after staring too long into a puddle, said he saw someone looking back at him wearing his clothes. Anna, the girl with the braid, was writing something frantically in a notebook, pages and pages. She wouldn't let anyone read it, just kept whispering to herself, "It's not a dream if you can feel the heat." I never found out what that meant. At lunch we heard it, a deep hum, like something enormous shifting beneath the earth. Not loud, but you felt it more than heard it. Our juice boxes rippled. The teacher dropped her mug. Everyone stopped moving just for a moment, and then we went on, because that's what you do in a town like Sagebrush Hollow. You keep pretending even when the cracks are wide enough to fall through. That afternoon the salesman came. Nobody ever visited Sagebrush Hollow without being invited, but there he was, a gray car, dusty shoes, sweating through his suit, knocked on the school side door and asked for a place to pray. I remember his face. It looked tired, not just from the sun, but from knowing something. He left without buying or selling anything. By nightfall the mayor had his name erased from the visitor log. Dinner was quiet. My father chewed too fast. My mother didn't eat at all. The radio wouldn't tune to anything but static. The air was heavy, thick, like walking through syrup. And the mirrors, God, the mirrors. Every mirror in the house had been covered with cloths, even the small hand mirror on my dresser. I asked why. My mother only said some things shouldn't reflect what's coming. That night I didn't sleep in my bed. I curled up in the linen closet, flashlight in hand, my dog beside me. I don't know why, it just felt safer to be somewhere small, somewhere forgotten. Sometime after midnight the dog growled once, then whimpered, then went still. There was movement outside the house, but not footsteps, more like sliding, as if something weightless was dragging itself across the world. I peeked through the slats of the closet, and I saw my mother standing in the hallway, still staring at the wall, murmuring something under her breath over and over again. "If we don't see it, maybe it won't see us." That was the last time I ever saw her. I've thought about that day endlessly. Every moment, every word, every vibration in the air. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a disaster. It was a countdown, something ancient, patient, and precise. And we had reached the final tick. Time did not run out. It simply paused, like a skipped heartbeat in the chest of the universe. That night, August 17th, 1952, I awoke in the linen closet to a sound that didn't belong in the world. Not thunder, not footsteps, not a voice. It was a frequency, a low, bone-deep vibration humming behind my eyes, a sound that wasn't sound, but feeling. My flashlight flickered, then died. My dog had stopped breathing, though his eyes were still open. I couldn't cry, I couldn't scream. All I could do was listen. The house wasn't shaking, but it felt stretched like something was pulling reality from both ends. Boards didn't creak, they flexed, the walls pulsed like they were holding their breath, and through the vent in the closet, I heard all the clocks stop ticking at once, all of them down to the second. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. My parents' bedroom was open, empty, sheets folded, the lights were on, but no sound, no TV, no murmuring, no wind. The mirrors had all been uncovered, and in each one I saw nothing, no reflection, not even mine, just a deep, smooth black. I remember reaching out to one and feeling cold air pouring from its surface, not glass, hollow like the mirror had become a window. But I didn't look too long. I remembered what my mother said: if something feels wrong, don't look in the mirror. So I ran downstairs. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, 4 plates, orange juice poured, still warm, like someone had just stepped away for a moment. The radio buzzed, faint static, but buried in it something. Elsa whispered so low I had to press my ear to the speaker. He stayed. I dropped the radio. I ran outside, and the world was empty, not destroyed, not abandoned, just paused. The streetlights flickered. The church bell was mid-swing, frozen, like someone had hit the pause button. A milk truck sat in the middle of Main Street, its door open, the engine running, but no driver. A baseball rested on the tip of a bat, hanging in air like it had never been thrown. I called out names: Anna, Mrs. Weller, my father, my mother. Nothing, not even an echo. The town didn't feel evacuated, it felt interrupted, as if something had reached down, pinched the town between two fingers, and plucked it from the world. Everyone was gone except me. I wandered for hours, maybe days. Time no longer passed. The sun hung low, but didn't set. The shadows didn't move. The birds didn't return, and the sound, the low hum, continued behind everything, just soft enough to question if it was real, but loud enough to keep me from forgetting. I broke into houses, every one of them identical, plates, warm food, untouched beds, made fires burning low, but no people, not even ashes, no signs of a struggle, no signs of life, just the faint smell of lilac. On the fourth day, I think I saw something near the edge of the forest, a figure, not a person, too tall, too thin, no face, just shape, standing by the old. While still watching, I ran, didn't stop until I was inside the church. The church, once locked, stood wide open inside. The candles were all lit, the pews were full, filled with empty clothing, suits, dresses, hats arranged as if the people wearing them had simply evaporated mid-sermon, and at the front, where the altar should have been, a mirror, tall, ancient, uncovered. The surface didn't reflect me, it showed the town alive, people walking, laughing, my parents holding hands, and then they all turned at once toward the mirror, toward me, and smiled, not warmly, knowingly. I ran out of the church, out of the square. I don't remember how long I ran, only that eventually I collapsed. That's when the car came, a black government vehicle, no plates, no sirens, just silence. 3 men in long coats and masks stepped out. One of them spoke, without moving his mouth. We found the loose thread. They wrapped me in blankets, didn't ask questions, didn't comfort me, didn't explain. They didn't seem afraid of what had happened. They seemed embarrassed, like this was a glitch they needed to patch. They took me away, and behind us, as the car drove off, I saw the town fade, not disappear, not collapse, just fade like fog in reverse, buildings turning to outline to dust to memory. I don't remember the drive, only the cold, the kind that seeps through the seams of your clothes and anchors itself to your bones. I sat in the back seat of that black car, my hands wrapped in a government-issued blanket, my eyes glued to the rear window. But there was nothing behind us. The town was gone, not destroyed, not buried, just replaced by an emptiness so complete it made me question if it had ever existed at all. They took me to a place with no name, a sterile white building in the middle of nowhere, a place with ticking clocks, locked doors, and people who only spoke in instructions. They didn't ask me what happened, they told me what didn't. There was no town. You were found wandering, you imagined the rest. Well, help you forget. At first, I screamed, cried, begged. I told them about the mirrors, about the stillness, about my mother's last words, about Anna, and the static in the radio, and the milk truck engine still running. I begged them to go back. They didn't even look at me, just nodded, wrote things down, and upped the dosage. They gave me pills with no names, told me they'd help me sleep, but I didn't want to sleep because every time I did, I woke up back in Sagebrush Hollow, walking alone through frozen streets, everyone watching me from mirrors, smiling. They changed my name. Henry Bell was burned. I became Harold Dunn. They forged birth certificates, enrolled me in a foster program in Nebraska, told my new family I'd been in a fire, that my memory was distorted by trauma. They weren't wrong, but it wasn't the fire that damaged me, it was the silence. Try being 10 years old and remembering an entire world no one else believes ever existed. Try living a life where the most important thing that ever happened to you is called a delusion. They told me it was grief, that ID invented it, that I was special, that I was sick. They didn't realize that was worse. In middle school, I drew maps of the town from memory: the grocery store, the bell tower, the trail behind the bakery that led to the well. My art teacher gave me an award, but I didn't want praise. I wanted witnesses. In high school, I stopped talking about it altogether. People stopped asking. The memories didn't stop, though. They just became quieter, sharper, like shards of glass I swallowed without realizing. I never went to college, never married. I had a job repairing clocks for 30 years. Clocks made sense to me. They only move forward, they only stop when something breaks. But some nights when the air smelled faintly of lilac, I'd wake up from a dream so vivid I'd swear I could still feel the warmth of the breakfast table, and in the mirror beside my bed for just a moment I'd see her, my mother, smiling, mouthing something I couldn't quite hear before she faded away again. Being the survivor didn't feel like a miracle, it felt like punishment. They say trauma isolates you from the world, but mine didn't just isolate me, it erased me. They took everything: my name, my home, my story, and worst of all, they made me doubt it had ever happened. For most people, adulthood is a slow ascent, a climb toward identity, family, belonging. For me, it was the opposite. It was a descent, not into madness, but into manufactured silence. After the relocation, after the name change, after the white coats and questionnaires and mirrors without reflections, I became manageable, not healed, just quiet enough to pass. Harold Dunn was polite. He worked hard. He repaired clocks in a shop that smelled of cedar and faint oil. A quiet man in a quiet town with a quiet past. No one ever asked questions, which is exactly how they wanted it. But memory doesn't obey laws, not even the government's. It bleeds through the cracks late at night, in moments between seconds, in the vibration of an old church bell, in the flicker of a television screen. Before it goes black, I started having dreams, not chaotic, colorful ones, but stark, empty, familiar dreams of doorways that opened into fog, of porches without houses, of children frozen mid-laughter like marionettes with cut strings, and always in the center of it all, Sagebrush Hollow. In the dreams, I wasn't a child anymore. I was me, older, lost, wandering the streets of a place that should not exist, calling names I could no longer remember, seeing faces I couldn't name, but still knew I'd loved. Sometimes I'd wake up crying, without understanding why. Once I caught myself murmuring, "Don't look in the mirror, don't look in the mirror." I hadn't said those words in decades, hadn't heard them since my mother whispered them like a psalm before the world folded. I tried to forget again. Therapy, medication, alcohol. I even burned one of my old childhood sketches of the town, watching it curl into blackened petals in the fireplace. It didn't help, because the forgetting wasn't mine to control. It had always been theirs. Twice I tried to end it, not out of despair, but out of fatigue. Do you know what it feels like to carry an entire world inside you that no one else believes in, to be the sole custodian of something that cannot be proven? It's like drowning in air, smiling in photographs where your soul isn't present. The first time I was stopped by a sound, a hum, low and familiar. I fell to the ground, clutching my head, weeping, whispering a name I didn't remember until later: Anna. The second time I saw my mother again, not in a vision in the mirror, only for a second, but she was there, aged exactly as she was that last morning. She mouthed something this time. I understood. "You weren't supposed to stay, Anne." Suddenly I wasn't sure if she meant me or them. That was the moment I knew I wasn't just remembering, I was being remembered. Something had begun to stir. In 1991, I wrote a letter addressed to no one in particular, just a confession, really. I sealed it in a shoebox, along with a faded photo of my parents, a child's map of Sagebrush Hollow, and a clipped article about towns removed from the census. I buried it under the floorboards of my house, because I didn't yet have the strength to say it out loud, but I knew the day would come, and when it did, it would not just be my memory cracking open, it would be the world. Some silences are peaceful, some are punishment, and some, like Sagebrush Hollow, waiting not to be heard, but to return. It started with a podcast, a harmless show about unsolved towns and forgotten myths. They called it Cartographers of the Strange, mostly conspiracy theories, radio static, and missing railroad lines. One episode was titled "The Town That Never Was." Sagebrush Hollow. They laughed, made up stories about time rifts and alien abductions, said the town was an urban legend built from misfiled census papers and a ghost story told by truckers on long-haul routes. But they got one thing right: it was supposed to be in Kansas, but there's nothing there, no ruins, no records, just a clearing where compasses spin. They chuckled, moved on, but the name stayed with me. Sagebrush Hollow. After all these years, someone had said it aloud. And it didn't feel like a coincidence, it felt like a summoning. I didn't plan to reach out. What would I say? That I was the last survivor of a town that vanished in 1952, that I'd seen my mother in a mirror that breathed, that I had memories no one could verify. No, I was old, tired. I'd learned to live with silence, but the silence no longer felt mine, it felt borrowed, and it was starting to turn on me. 3 weeks after that episode aired, a letter arrived, typed, no return address. Just one sentence: you weren't the only one who saw the mirrors. I sat with it for hours. My hands trembled, my heart raced, my eyes filled. It was either a cruel trick or a crack in the wall. So I made a call, a quiet one, to a small documentary crew specializing in forgotten towns and American myth. I didn't give my real name, just told them I had a story. They agreed to come, not for fame, not for profit, just to listen. We met in the basement of a shuttered library. ID asked for no cameras, just audio. It was cold, quiet, safe. They set up a microphone. I sat down, stared at my hands, then said my first real sentence in over 50 years. My name was Henry Bell. I was 9 years old when my town disappeared, and I was the only one left behind. The room went still. They didn't laugh, didn't interrupt. They just listened, and once I began, I couldn't stop. I told them everything: the town, the stillness, the hum, the mirrors, my mother's voice on his notebook, the salesman who asked to pray, the radio whisper he stayed, the suits, the erasure, the empty church full of clothes, the mirror at the altar that reflected a town still living, but no longer here. At some point my voice cracked, my throat gave out. I started to cry, not just from grief, from release, as if the truth had been caught in my chest. All these years, and only now was being exhaled fully. They didn't speak for a long time. Then one of them, Elena, I think, asked, why now? Why tell it after all these years? I looked at her and said, because I'm starting to see things again, because something's stirring, because I don't think the town is gone, I think it's returning. They asked to go there, to where it used to be. I said, yes, even though I was terrified, even though I swore I'd never return, because I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. It never had been. That night, I sat by my mirror. Not covered, not cracked, just watching, and for the first time in decades, I saw a movement, not behind me, inside it, and I knew the hollow remembers. The church had always been at the center of Sagebrush Hollow, St. Aurelius Chapel, white clapboard walls, tall narrow steeple, a bell that rang 3 times a day, like a heartbeat for the town. Growing up, it felt sacred, but not in the way churches are supposed to feel. It wasn't warmth or grace that filled the air, it was containment. Like it wasn't a place where things were worshipped, but where things were kept quiet. After my confession made its way online, a retired archivist named Glenn Radley reached out. Said had been collecting audio reels from abandoned churches across the Midwest for years. One batch sent anonymously in the 1980s had always unsettled him. He never found a match for the church's name, no trace of the town it was supposedly from. But after hearing me say the words Sagebrush Hollow, he went to his files and checked the labels. One reel was dated Sagebrush Hollow, July 1952. There were 6 tapes in total, all unmarked except the month and year. He digitized them for us, and when I pressed play, I felt my body go cold, because I recognized the voice instantly. Reverend Elijah Crane, the town's pastor, a man whose sermons were firm, gentle, but always watching. The first tape began like any other studio microphone. The Lord is our shepherd, we shall not want. But what if what we want is to forget what we once opened? Each subsequent recording grew stranger. On the second reel, you could hear him preaching, not from the pulpit but from somewhere lower. The acoustics were different, hollow. He wasn't delivering a sermon anymore, he was pleading. Studio microphone. The mirror is not a symbol, it's a gate, and gates once opened demand tribute. Studio microphone. We should never have agreed, it only remembered us, because we remembered it. By the third tape, there was no congregation, only his voice shaking. Fractured. Studio microphone. The bells don't ring in time anymore, they ring in rhythm with something beneath us. Studio microphone. Children have started speaking languages they've never learned. I saw Mrs. Weller's shadow move after she did. Tape 4 is mostly silence, but at the 17-minute mark, there's a chant, low, repetitive, not English, not Latin, somewhere in between, and just before the reel ends, the sound of shattering glass, then breathing right next to the microphone. Tape 5 is shorter, it begins with the Reverend sobbing, then he whispers, studio microphone. They asked me to lead them, and I led them to the edge. Studio microphone. We were supposed to keep the mirror covered, that was the only rule. Studio microphone. They looked, we looked. Now it looks static, overtakes the rest, but in the background you can hear faint singing children's voices, a lullaby that ends in a single unified whisper. He stayed. The final tape, silence, 33 minutes of complete perfect quiet, except for one thing at the very end, a bell ringing, just once, no echo, no wind, just a note suspended in nothingness. When the audio ended, no one in the room moved. One of the producers whispered, "It sounds like he was preparing for an execution," and I said, "Not an execution, a crossing." We asked Glenn if he knew where the tapes had been found. He said they were mailed anonymously from a rural P.O. box in Colorado. No name, no fingerprints. The label was typed on a manual machine. But when he flipped over the box and peeled back the paper, he found something carved into the wood, a single sentence etched with a blade: "Don't look in the mirror." The church tapes didn't prove everything, but they proved something that the town knew, that the Reverend tried to stop it, and that the silence wasn't an accident, it was part of the ritual. The tapes should have been enough to bring reporters, enough to reopen files, enough to prove Sagebrush Hollow had existed. But when we tried to dig deeper, we found holes, not gaps, absences, files that had been reclassified, maps that were digitally scrubbed, satellite images that ended in no data blocks. As if something or someone had decided the Hollow wasn't just forgotten, it was forbidden. We filed Freedom of Information Act requests. 3 came back, no records found. 1 came back heavily redacted. Lines of black ink, dates missing, entire pages blank except for bureaucratic fragments. Containment protocol breach 0/8/1752. Subject Alphabel exhibited resilient memory retention. Project Salvation terminated and buried. That was it. No mention of the town, no mention of a mirror, just bureaucratic dust. Then we got a tip from a former geospatial analyst, a woman named Mallory, who'd worked with declassified Cold War recon photography. She sent us a single photo taken in 1953 by a military drone over rural Kansas. It showed what looked like a perfectly circular clearing, roughly the size of a town, but no buildings, just trees felled in a pattern, dead grass, scorched soil. At the center, a strange void, not a crater, more like an absence of film exposures. If the camera refused to record that spot of blacked in a clean landscape, a negative that never developed. I only saw that once. Mallory told us they called it a burn zone. Then she whispered they didn't just erase the town, they made it so even memory couldn't grow there. Still, we searched for the ground itself using Henry's old maps. We triangulated coordinates between 3 known landmarks: an old railroad switch, a dried riverbed, and the remains of a 1950s mining depot. We hiked the land for miles. What we found wasn't a town, it was topsoil newer than the forest around it, laid deliberately, the kind of soil used to bury something. We dug not deep, just enough to test the truth. Within 2 feet, we hit stone, not natural tiles, charred wood, rust. Anthena, single object, a nameplate, metal, burnt, unreadable, except for 1 line: St. Aurelius Chapel. Do not disturb. The chills we felt weren't from wind. We marked the spot, took GPS, left it untouched. We weren't equipped for excavation, but it confirmed what we feared. The town wasn't erased by time. It was covered deliberately, scientifically, like something buried alive. Later that night, Henry told us something he hadn't said before, that in 1956 had been sent to a follow-up clinic in New Mexico, a government-run center for children labeled post-traumatic delusional. He only stayed 2 days, not because he was cured, but because something terrified the doctors. They placed a standard mirror in his room, and the next morning it was cracked from the inside. Henry said he hadn't touched it, but he remembered dreaming a girl with a braid, a chapel bell, and a town under glass. They tried to erase Sagebrush Hollow from records, but they couldn't erase it from him, and if they couldn't erase it from Henry, who else still carried it? There are rumors of others: a woman in Idaho who paints the same town in every canvas, a man in Ohio who want enter rooms with mirrors, a child in Texas who disappeared for a day then reappeared holding a church bulletin from 1952 that no one had ever seen, too scattered to prove, too similar to ignore. You can bury truth under topsoil, ink, fire, and silence, but it still has roots, and sometimes if the ground trembles just right, it blooms. We asked Henry if he remembered exactly when it happened, the moment the town began to fold, not when it vanished, but when it started to let go. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I looked when I wasn't supposed to, and it looked back. It was a week before the disappearance. A Sunday church service had ended. The congregation filed out to drink lemonade in the square, but Henry had stayed behind, had heard a sound, a soft chime from behind the altar. Curious, alone, he pulled back a velvet curtain. Rarely touched there, nestled in the shadows, was a tall, narrow mirror, but it didn't reflect him, not at first. Instead, it showed the town not as it was that moment, but how it would be: empty, silent, frozen. The baseball midair, the milk truck idling, the bed still warm. He stood frozen, staring as the image shifted, and he saw himself walking alone through it, the only one left. I thought it was a trick, he said, a dream, some grown-up illusion. But when he Finally blinked the mirror, changed now it showed. Everyone, the entire congregation, the whole town lined up behind him, standing shoulder to shoulder, but not moving, just watching him, smiling not kindly, but knowingly, as if he were the final piece. I didn't tell anyone, Henry whispered. I didn't know how, but from that day forward the town began to bend. People repeated themselves. Shadows lingered too long. The church bell rang at impossible hours, and the mirror, though hidden again, remained breathing behind the curtain, waiting. What if it needed one of us to look, he asked. What if the hollow was a lock and I was the key that turned it? We didn't answer, because the question wasn't for us, it was for the town. Henry stood and walked to the mirror Wed brought into the studio, an antique, frameless, simple thing, but he stared at it for almost a full minute, then said, "It's not the object, it's the invitation." He placed his hand on the surface, and for a moment the light shifted. Not a trick, not a shadow, but something deeper, as if the mirror had depth, not just behind the glass, but behind him. "I think I saw the future," he whispered. "I think the mirror showed me what it was about to do, and I think by seeing it, I made it real." The weight of those words hung thick. It reframed everything. Henry hadn't just survived, had been chosen as witness, as mistake, as sacrifice. Even he didn't know why. "You?" someone asked softly. Henry looked down, then up, then into the camera. "Because I looked with curiosity, not fear. And I think that's what it wanted to be remembered to be. Noticed, and now it's waking up again because I'm doing exactly that." The idea chilled us. What if it wasn't a place at all? What if Sagebrush Hollow was never a town? What if it was a container for a thing that only exists when looked at, and all it took to unbind it was a child's innocent stare? Mirrors don't just reflect light, they reflect belief, and once belief touches something, it leaves fingerprints. Henry sat back down, eyes glassy, hands trembling. "I'm sorry," he said, "not to us, but to the world. I didn't mean to remember it." He said he wanted to go back one last time to the place where the town used to be, where the trees now stood too evenly, where compasses spun like dancers with no rhythm, where grass grew in circular silence. We didn't argue. There was no point. Henry was nearing the end, his eyes glassy with the weight of unshed decades, his breath already sounding like goodbye. He didn't go to prove anything. He went because he needed to hear what the silence had become. We packed light, 3 cameras, 1 audio recorder, and the mirror, the same one from the studio, just in case. It took 6 hours to reach the coordinates. We parked the car at the edge of a clearing that didn't exist on any map, a ring of trees shaped in near-perfect geometry. A hush in the air, like sound had been told to wait. No insects, no birds, just the wind, thin, uncertain. Henry stepped forward slowly, as if expecting resistance, but none came. "This is where the chapel stood," he said softly. He knelt, touched the dirt, closed his eyes, and then he sang just one line, a hymn no one taught him. "May the mirror guard what truth can't hold." His voice trembled like glass on the edge of shattering. That's when we heard it, the bell, faint, distant, impossible, one single toll, and then another, measured, steady, a church bell no longer attached to any building, still ringing in a world that forgot it. We began recording, but the equipment crackled, lenses blurred, the air shimmered not like heat, but like reality was folding inward, and thin in the monitor we saw them, figures. Dozens of them, faint, transparent, standing between trees, watching, not menacing, not moving, just present, wearing 1952, frozen in their moment. "Don't speak," Henry said, "just listen." And in that moment we felt it like a whisper in our spines, a presence, something collective, a memory, so strong it had become sentient, not a haunting, a gathering. Henry stepped to the center of the field, set the mirror down, turned it toward the trees. We held our breath, and in the glass we didn't see ourselves, we saw the town. Alive, breathing, children laughing, Anna smiling, Mrs. Weller at her bakery window, the milk truck rolling by, and at the center Henry, young, 9 years old, looking back at us through time, through memory, through the mirror. Tears spilled from Henry's eyes. He raised his hands low, trembling, and the boy inside the mirror raised his in return, finger to glass, a lifetime apart. "I'm ready," he whispered. The bell rang again, and the image in the mirror shifted. Everyone in the reflection turned, faced Henry, smiled. This time not with knowledge, with welcome. The wind stilled the leaves, hushed the figures between the trees, faded like mist. And when we turned back, Henry was gone. No trace, no footprints, no collapse, just the mirror, still warm, still humming, and beside it a single object in the dirt, his mother's locket, open, empty. We called the authorities. No one found anything, not Henry, not the site, not even our gear. Only the footage remained corrupted in places, but the mirror was untouched. Some say he died, some say he wandered, some say he was swallowed by madness, but we don't believe that. We saw the look on his face. He didn't disappear. he returned to the hollow, to the memory that would not die, to the town that only exists when you believe hard enough to bring it back. In the weeks that followed Henry's disappearance, the footage circulated in silence, first among archivists, then among fringe historians, then among those who remembered things they were never supposed to recall. No one could explain what happened, but everyone who watched the footage reported the same feeling: a name, a town, just beyond reach, on the tip of the tongue, on the edge of a dream. We spoke with cartographers, experts in historical geography. We showed them maps from 1949, 1951, 1952 they traced. The roads, noted the rivers, and then always the same pause. Their fingers would hover over the space between county lines, puzzled. There should be a settlement here. And yet on the modern maps, nothing, just empty. Field, no digital overlay, no satellite coordinates, just void. One FEMA woman named Rivera showed us something remarkable. She pulled a scanned index of U.S. post offices from 1952 and pointed to a single line: faint, blurred sagebrush hollow est 1891, closed August 18th. 1952, and then a red stamp. Across the record, null location entry removed. We asked her what that meant. She shrugged. Usually means the town was a ghost entry, a clerical error, never really there. But then she leaned in, voice quieter. Or it means someone wanted us to believe that there are places like this all across the country, towns that vanished, communities that faded, names no longer spoken. They don't go with screams or fire or ruin. They go with repetition, with muffling, with erasure, until even memory questions itself. We began to get letters, emails, voicemails from anonymous numbers, people who saw the film and felt something familiar. They described towns from their childhoods they couldn't locate, desert roads that led to nowhere but felt like home, a train ride to a station that no longer exists. One man sent a photo from 1960, his father standing in front of a town sign, Sagebrush Hollow. The letters were half cracked, the wood rotting, but clear. A place that had no right to still exist. The photo had no location data, and a week after receiving it, the sender vanished. You might think this is all myth, and maybe you're right. Maybe it's just the mind's way of organizing trauma. Maybe Sagebrush Hollow never existed. Maybe Henry Bell was a man mourning a place he invented. Maybe this whole story is a house of mirrors, each one reflecting a fear we dare not name. But ask yourself this: why is there no official record of a town that so many remember? Why do so many mirrors fog at the same time each August? Why, when you close your eyes, can you still hear the bell somewhere out there beyond the lines of the map? The hollow waits not to be found, but to be believed in, because that's the final truth Henry never said aloud, but made us feel. It doesn't matter if the town was real, it matters that it still wants to be. And when enough people remember it again, when the silence finally wears thin, when someone somewhere looks into the wrong mirror at the right time, it will return.